Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of Two Wise Guys. I am your host, Dan. I'm here with my co-host and brother-in-law, Chris.
Hello.
And tonight we have our very first guest host with us, a young man named Brantley, who's a friend of mine. Say hello, Brantley.
Hello.
And Brantley is here in Columbia with me. He and I took some IT courses earlier this year together. He's a really cool guy. We got a chance to kind of get to know each other during the class and a little bit after the class as well. And so we thought, who better to bring on the show for a probably most likely divergent opinion than him. So, but just a little bit before we begin the episode, Two Wise Guys, for those of you who are new, who haven't checked out the show before. Sorry, video autoplayed. Awesome. Two Wise Guys is a show about thoughtful discussion. We are here to talk about news, politics, science, technology, anything in between. So if there's anything that you guys are interested in talking about, feel free to hop into the live chat, which is to the right of the screen that you're looking at there. And we'll be happy to talk with you about it, answer some questions you might have along the way. And the only guidelines we have here is to be respectful and to have a good time. So we'd love to hear more from you. And why don't you go ahead, Brantley, and just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Okay. As Dan said, I'm Columbia, originally from here, but I went to college in the Chicago area, did a little bit of graduate school in Washington, D.C., kind of, made my way through the economy as any millennial has tried. Stumbled my way into the classes that led me to meet Dan. So I'm here to have a good discussion, see what we agree on, see what we may disagree on, and, we'll see how good of a time we have.
Very good. And Chris, this week, you said you wanted to talk about the JFK files. Now, I haven't had a chance to really look at too many of them, just a couple articles here and there. Why don't you start by kind of giving us all a heads up about what's going on with it, and for anyone who might be living under a rock who doesn't know about what's coming out with these files.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So we are unscripted here, but usually we try to have one topic just so we can get off the, get moving. So the JFK files are relating to the JFK assassination. I think just about everyone, even people living under a rock, probably have heard of the JFK assassination and the corresponding theories that everybody has, that are tied to it. I think everybody, from my grandma to, I don't know, but everybody has sort of like their own ideas and take on it. Some people believe I guess mainstream theory, or mainstream what we're told, which is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, shot him somehow from different directions, multiple directions from a hill. And there's a lot of stuff from the assassination that, quite frankly, that we've been told that just doesn't add up. A lot of it, is addressed in multiple shows that you can find on like History Channel and all kinds of stuff, pretty reputable places. But they definitely, for the most part, stick to the mainstream ideology, which has been, again, the Lee Harvey Oswald story. So that's a little bit of history. And more recently, sort of what events have taken place is that the president has ordered the release of some 3,000 files regarding the JFK assassination. So these are like FBI, CIA files. This is like investigative stuff that has been classified for the last, 40, 50, 60 years. So these files were actually released, I think, last week. They released a number of them, and then a number of them were withheld. And then more recently, I think yesterday, as well as over last weekend, most, if not all, of the files were released under the president's orders. So it's just a really, really bizarre thing, because the files were actually supposed to be released in 1992, but they were held back by the Clinton administration and never released at that point. So they were like, it's like the files were at the age, the classified files get to a point where they are eligible to be declassified after a certain amount of time. And so they were not declassified at that point, and then and now they have been. So among some of the revelations that have come out, there's just been some really interesting stuff, and a lot of it seems to point to the fact that it was not, in fact, Lee Harvey Oswald that acted alone. And some other interesting sort of peripheral stuff has also emerged regarding involvements of Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was the vice president at the time that Kennedy was president of the United States, and then he later took office almost immediately after JFK was assassinated, which is standard procedure. When the president is incapacitated or killed, then the vice president takes over, so he's the next in command. But the interesting thing is that with some of the information in these documents, they seem to be very suspicious of Lyndon Johnson having some sort of a hand in the assassination of him. And in fact, there's been released, I think, corresponding releases by other governments, including, of all places, Russia, but also France. Both of their intelligence agencies had released information that sort of pointed to Lyndon Johnson being culpable, if not somehow involved in taking down JFK. So again, this is all stuff that comes out of the FBI files. This isn't really allegations. These are just investigative notes. It was never put into a courtroom or anything like that. So it's not like it's official law, but it is the FBI, it is the CIA. So while we have to take it with a grain of salt, these are some very interesting things. So that's sort of where it's at now. I don't know if you guys, I mean, obviously you guys were saying that you hadn't really done too much research into them, but I guess maybe a good place to start the conversation would be sort of what were your thoughts regarding JFK's assassination before the release, and have they changed since then with any type of information that's been out, or the fact that it's been released? Either of you could.
Dan, you start.
All right. Well, I mean, I've always I've never really believed the official story, but that's no real surprise. I very rarely believe the official story. I don't know. I've often thought that there was, from the documentaries that I had seen in the past about the assassination, I always figured there was probably a third shooter because of the trajectory of the bullets that went through. But I don't know. I've often also heard about possible links between the CIA with Lee Harvey Oswald, and I don't really know a whole lot about the backstory. It's one of those points of history that was a big deal that I never really spent too much time on because it's like, okay, he's dead, let's just move on. But I've always kind of wondered, is it how involved was the deep state, if you'd prefer to use that term, but was it an intelligence agency kind of thing? Was it the mafia? Was it, how many shooters were there, I guess you could say. But I don't know. I always I never really thought that it was just a standalone assassin, as the official story has always said.
For decades, conspiracy
Okay. I mean, I would say for me, given that I'm not the type of person that ventures too far into kind of what we would, I guess, term conspiracy theories. So for me, I guess I'll kind of be a neutral opinion on this one and say, well, I can maybe, get what the historical record might be. But kind of leaning what you were just saying, what, if you then want to allege there was deep state interference, what, I guess the first skeptical question would be, what would be the interest that all these other groups of people would have in taking Kennedy out? I mean, we can rewind the clock a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you could start with the Bay of Pigs and move on from there. But I think Kennedy was, as we all know, he was a very popular president publicly. I think he was just one of those guys that was just like really popular all the way around. And I feel like you kind of see that with like presidents from yesteryear, that a lot of them were, or that the country itself was kind of more unified at that time, and the belief that the president had the best interests of the people. And we've seen that sort of shift as time has gone on, where presidents' approval ratings have not been the same. But the thing I think is that he had a lot of enemies, and one of the it's odd because I think one of the prevailing theories before the documents release was mafia involvement. And the interesting thing is that the FBI documents seem to corroborate that. So there is quite a bit of mentioning of mob type stuff, mob involvement and sabotage and all things like that. So, and then also another issue or another thing with the mob is that apparently one of the things that was unearthed was that there was a CIA mafia plot to kill Castro. So, another one of just like it seems like more so than anything with these documents, we're seeing a lot of peripheral revelations, not necessarily strictly regarding JFK himself, but we're seeing implicated people such as Oswald, but also Castro. We're seeing mentions of the KGB in Russia. We're seeing mafia mentions, but another person that's been mentioned has been JFK, MLK, Martin Luther King. Those revelations seem like they've sort of just broken within the last day with this latest dump. There were some very interesting documents regarding that, which is strange because when you think about it, these are the JFK files, but we're seeing that there's much more to these files than just JFK.
Yeah, and another thing I just noticed, I'm kind of trying to learn a little bit as we go through this, and I just checked on Twitter because that's where the best place to get all the news is from. And it's actually it was a tweet that came out from WikiLeaks. My good friends, everyone's best friends there, and it says CIA violates Trump's promise to release JFK files with only names and addresses redacted, most pages entirely blank. And so I'm going to throw a link in the show notes of this one document. It's 221 pages, so I'm not going to go through the entire thing right now, but I've gone through about the first 30 or 40 pages, and most of them have been completely redacted. So yeah, I'd be interested to look through all the documents and see just how much of it has been, taken out.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're not seeing a lot of hard information on the assassination itself. There's sort of like loose stuff saying like, oh yeah, Oswald wasn't the only person, and then sort of peripheral stuff, and it's not a lot that's just regarding the assassination. So like you're saying, there is a lot of redacted material, so we can't expect to glean too much from it if they're just gonna straight up black everything out.
Right. Yeah.
It's just a big tease.
Well, isn't that what the government always does?
They dangle the carrot in front of you and they're like, up, and keep you running after it.
Well, it's like I said last week. What's the point of releasing all these documents if releasing them with any kind of redaction is going to just lead to people saying, well, it's just more of a cover-up? I mean, he released most of the documents, I'm pretty sure, but there was a few hundred that he didn't release because the FBI and CIA were saying that you would breach national security. After, 60 years since it's happened, it's still going to breach national security?
Right.
What?
They're still worried about the rest of us stepping on their shoes.
Yeah. Wow, Dan, the first, like you're saying, I'm looking at this. You have to see this to believe this, but the first 30 pages of this document are redacted completely. There's literally like a big white box that somebody drew in Photoshop on top of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty insane.
I love the sound effect of the wheel scrolling. It adds to the effect.
It's awesome.
You're hearing like all of our mouses clicking, and like the click wheel of my mouse right now.
It's like, where is it? I found a G.
I'd love to get come up with like a hard number on the percentage of redaction here, but this has got to be over 50%, if not more, on these documents. Okay. At least on this one. Is this the entire dump? Is that what that is, Dan? Or
I don't know. It might be
221 pages, but there were supposedly like 3,000 documents. Look at this; it's all redacted.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just I don't know. I'll retweet the WikiLeaks tweet itself onto the Two Wise Guys Twitter.
I'm gonna do
people can find it that way. But
I'm gonna do a screen share here real quick for our viewers, just so you can see the redaction. This is an actual document, people, that was released as evidence.
That's a lot of names and addresses.
Like I'm just scrolling through, like this is like the middle of the document here. The first 30, okay, that's the end of the document, but then the first 30 pages of the document were redacted. I don't know what the last 90 pages are redacted. There's like a couple lists or something. There's like some like check boxes where like it's probably just literally a form that the FBI like filled out, like this right here. This is literally like looks like a form that the FBI request renewal, advised pouching date, end of message. Like, it's literally like nothing. It's just a checkbox that some FBI guy had to fill out. So, you know what? That's funny because I hadn't actually looked at the documents themselves. I'm just kind of reading news reports as they come out, seeing what they say. But this is pretty hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Where are people getting all this information then from? This must not be the only document, or they're really scouring it for something. I don't know.
They must. I mean, they have entire staffs that they can dedicate to just going through this stuff. I'm sure that they have people who are just paid to sit there and go through these pages.
Or is this the 200 pages that was withheld? Because I know that there was something like 200 pages that was previously withheld. So then they're like, oh yeah, we'll release it. And then they release it, but it's completely redacted.
80% of it.
So, big old tease.
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question.
Okay. Well, there's one other interesting thing, and that I want to just touch on here. That's related because it's coming out. It's like this one's on BBC, but it's referring to Martin Luther King. It says explosive Martin Luther King document among JFK files. And I don't know about you guys personally, but I'm like a huge MLK fan. I love the guy. I love what he's done, not just for civil rights, but for just the amazing example that he is to all of us as far as publicly, just being this amazing person. But so it's kind of like weird to see this stuff come out. And again, this is BBC, but they're saying like that there was some sort of like the FBI. There's an FBI dossier of civil rights leader Martin Luther King alleges that he had a string of affairs and other sexual aberrations, as well as links to the Communist Party. And I'm just gonna kind of stop there. I don't want to delve too far into it, but I mean, I guess like, gosh, I mean, it's like disappointing to hear, but it doesn't change like what he did and what he stood for. But I'm just kind of like, man, like what famous person doesn't have skeletons in their closet if Martin Luther King doesn't, And it's just like, I mean, to me, like he was always sort of like this, like amazing, just like guy to look up to, and he still is. But just to see that is just like, and to tie that in, since it's talking about sexual stuff, just with the Harvey Weinstein stuff and just all that other stuff getting exposed, sort of like high level sexual abuse and stuff. It's just kind of like requires for me like just a bit of a gut check, almost like, wow, this this stuff is like really going on and we got to do something about it. But what do you guys think about that? I mean, it's FBI document saying that there's certain things about affairs and stuff. I mean, what is this?
I mean, it's not too surprising, I guess. I mean, because you could say, well, they were obviously trying to discredit part of the movement he was working with, because obviously, this was something that was going to have to, the government didn't want to take a lot of that into question, because nobody wanted to really push for the type of legislation he wanted on at least a federal level, and it kind of becomes a, blackmail you to kind of keep you out. I mean, because, leading up to his work, because the last thing he did leading up to his assassination was, organizing labor in the South. So it's kind of a mix, from what I guess, everybody has some problem. Was King that much of an adulterer? Who knows? I guess maybe, well, let's see. His wife is dead, I think. His children, I mean, I don't know if they're going to speak out on this to any real extent or not.
But let's be real, like adultery is one thing, but then like some of the stuff we're hearing about in the news about other people now is like a completely another thing where it's
right. And I guess that kind of makes the difference in terms of where we are morally, and maybe the level of corruption that's been swept under the rug over the last 50 or so years.
Yeah. And I'm just reading a quote here from one of these documents. It's just here's a quotation. It says, King is a wholehearted Marxist who has studied it believes in it and agrees with it, but because he is being a minister of religion, does not dare to espouse it publicly. So they're saying he doesn't talk about it. In addition, King has been described within the CPUSA as a true, genuine Marxist-Leninist from the top of his head to the tips of his toes. And I mean, to be fair, these documents were never released while he was there. But yeah, it does make you wonder, sort of, like you're saying, Brantley, like if these are in documents, if these are in classified documents, this is what the U.S. government thought of him and was writing about him at the time. And obviously shows sort of like the behind the scenes of them opposing him, basically, and almost like digging up dirt, if you will, like, you know, to sort of, yeah, like you're saying, discredit, and not just discredit him, but through attempting to discredit him, to try to discredit that entire movement as it was happening.
Well, as far as I understand it too, as far as the whole Communist Party USA connection, I know that he knew, you know, communist philosophy. I knew that he knew communists, and I think they may have worked together in some of the protests because they were good at organizing. I know, but a lot of that, you know, a lot of the documents that are talking about him as, you know, a hardcore, you know, communist and Leninist in particular. He was not a Leninist. If you've ever read Lenin, you would know that he's not a Leninist. But he, you know, he was very unpopular. They needed to find a way to stop him, and at that point in time, you know, this is not too far after the McCarthy era, so it's one of those times where, you know, communism was a dirty word, and so, and the communist was to essentially, you know, put them at risk of going to prison for, you know, political blasphemy, basically.
One of the sections of the it was between the quotations that I read. I just want to read this real quick from the same document. Says further, in March 1962, Levinson told a CPUSA functionary that King was concerned about a, quote, communist label being planted, quote, planted on us, but that at the same time he wanted to do everything possible to evidence friendship toward the Soviet Union. And the fact that he's concerned about that being planted on him shows that he was at least somewhat aware, if not completely aware, of, you know, the government trying to make him look a certain way. He even used the word communist label being pinned on us. So if anything, this to me shows the way that at least at some points, the U.S. government is functioning behind the scenes to influence public opinion on key public figures, particularly those they don't agree with or may not agree with.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, there's also that kind of belief, you know, that Gloria Steinem was, you know, a CIA agent that was kind of working to get information regarding various women's organizations. So, you know, so it's kind of like you know, you kind of have to think about it in the sense of, just as we do in foreign policy, the figureheads we want to put out there are not always, I don't want to say the cleanest, but, you know, sometimes there are other forces working upon those that manage to kind of get written in the annals of history. I mean, you know, speaking of kind of King's work, would say Rosa Parks. You know, there's the train of thought that says, well, the reason they kind of chose Rosa Parks to, in some regards, stage, quote unquote, her bus, you know, incident was mostly because they said, well, between some of the people they could have chosen, you know, she was, you know, this kind of, you know, middle-aged sort of nurse, and wasn't, you know, a single, you know, she wasn't a single unwed mother. You know, in other words, you have to, in organizing, you have to kind of present the best public face to whatever cause you're trying to bring awareness to.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. I mean, wow, just hearing you describe that, the public relations of it is really cool, because that's an aspect I never really thought about with the Rosa Parks incident, and just how powerful that was, and how powerful it became, sort of like that figurehead, one of those figurehead moments that really helped to crystallize that movement. And I think that's really cool, and it really shows. It's almost like the precursor to like social media, where you sort of like put out the stuff that you want to make sure so that it's perceived the correct way in the public. And I think that's one of the key parts of PR that people, like sort of like everyday people who aren't PR people don't think about is that you do really have to think about your audience. You really do have to think about how people are going to receive things, and like you're saying, Brantley, putting this specific woman in at that specific time in the right place and being able to have this sort of like the eyes of the nation get on that really did help to bring things and further things in the civil rights movement in a really positive way. So it's really cool. And I feel like people have this sort of like notion that like these things are all organic all the time, and it's just like that's just what happens, and it was just like the sort of natural progression of things. But a lot of times we find that in history, a lot of important historical events were given that importance because the majority of public, or a high percentage of public, were made aware of those things, through the channels that are available to them at the time. For example, like Walter Cronkite back in the 60s and 70s, he's the guy you're going to receive your news from. You're going to trust him, and when he tells you something, you're gonna trust that and believe it. So, and then nowadays we have so many sources, and maybe this is something we can move into with our topic. But we have so many sources, so many options out there. Everybody does their own news with their own perspective and everything. That's very difficult for the everyday person to sort of sort through the truth and the lies. And so much so that we even have sites completely dedicated to fact checking now, which is crazy when you think about it. That sort of thing even exists, like fact checking. It's like, shouldn't the people who present the information to us, such as the CNN, such as the NBCs, the Foxes, and etc., from then on, shouldn't they be fact checking themselves? Shouldn't everybody just be fact checking themselves? And I think one of the issues is that there's so many voices out there that are not just like these major corporations, because I feel like the major corporations, we've seen the trust in them fall. Like, I think trust in media, or as far as like the news media, is pretty low now versus even 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Right. I'm trying to think, because I got a thought that's kind of spiraling off that. Because what I was going to ask was, do you think that in the age of social media, because we don't want to use the words kind of like pure and impure activism, but that's kind of the only thing I'm really kind of thinking in those terms right now, is, do you think that in the age of social media there can truly be anything as pure activism anymore?
I think we kind of answered, or at least for myself,
right? We kind of like halfway answered it.
It's a lot of PR, I think, in my opinion. And again, that goes back to the fact that you have to sort of structure if you are going to be active in something and you're trying to promote a cause, you don't just want to promote it without thinking about it, because then if you don't think about it, if you don't structure it properly, then and you don't understand your audience and who's going to be viewing that, then you're risking sending out the wrong message, because we all perceive things differently. We all have a different perspective on things due to our upbringing, due to there's billions of different possibilities that everyone can experience different things at different points in their lives. Infinite, not even billions, just infinite possibilities. So I think that the purity of it is in the optics. It's sort of like the purity is in the eye of the beholder, if you will. So it's like the person watching it can believe it's as pure as they want. And I think, but I think like anything that's truly organic, I think there can be pure things. I guess I'm kind of going around here in my mind. I think there can be truly pure things.
Very platonic right now. You're very platonic.
Yeah, there can be. Now I'm sort of like going around in my mind. There can be truly pure things that are very organic and that do have a positive impact. But at the same time, I don't know. Like,
I guess at the same time, the risk of opportunism is probably at its greatest historically, in terms of it being misused, in terms of it being conditioned outside of the context. Because one of the thoughts that came to my head was, with social media, especially with like this, with Periscope, anyone and everyone is anybody's audience. So anything can be broadcast. So it's that kind of, I guess what would make it so it requires a certain kind of craftiness in the new media landscape that we haven't quite worked out yet in terms of filtering through, which is why you're seeing this whole attacking with Facebook about, well, are they a media platform or a tech company? Or do they have a responsibility to put out, to do their own fact checking? Do they need like an in-house Snopes department every time someone posts a meme or an ad gets uploaded or a video gets uploaded or an article is shared, especially if they're trending that off to you and saying, okay, well, this is the news as Facebook sees it, but is that the news as it really is happening in real time?
Well, I think that's the danger of that kind of censorship is that it becomes very subjective to the particular platform that is responsible for censoring and filtering the material out, because then you end up having Facebook has its hypothetically Facebook would have its own fact checkers, and Google would have their own fact checkers, and Twitter would have their own fact checkers, and then every platform has their own, but everybody comes to the table with a bias. And so how long until those fact checkers allow their own bias to seep in? I mean, I think it's fairly well known, and it's not really supposed to be inflammatory or controversial, but I think it's pretty fairly well known that most places in Silicon Valley, most places in the tech industry, most places in entertainment and in the media tend to lean to the left. And so then the voices on the right are going to cry foul whenever something that they support is decried as fake news or something like that. Just the same as, if you were to go to a more conservative side of things, it's going to have the same problem. I don't really see how having fact checkers are going to actually solve anything, because, I mean, it's the assumption has to be that the people who are doing the fact checking are going to be somehow immune from their own bias, and I don't see that happening.
Checking the fact checkers,
right? It becomes the checkers who check the checkers who check the checkers who check the checkers. Yeah. And I mean, because you see, I remember, what was it, a Guardian article that came out a couple months ago that was talking about, Facebook's, their sort of hate speech, the hate speech controversy, and kind of how they have this very meandering kind of way of doing, of how their back end moderators are sitting there approving or removing posts, and it was like, well, it was like, you can't show a Nazi flag, but you can show Mein Kampf. You can show Mussolini's fascist marching, but someone can report the Charlottesville rioters. So I mean, it's a whole kind of weird system that exists. And that's just one platform. I mean, look at the controversy with Reddit, and taking out the Donald and all the other various, alt-right subreddits. So there's this whole issue with how do you blend the free speech of the people who want to be on the platform, and then kind of, in some regards, do you have to let them run their own insane asylum? Do you have to kind of wall them off then and kind of say, well, you do your thing over here, just don't bring it to this group? I mean, is that kind of where we're going to end up with these media platforms? Because I mean, because like we all know what we use Instagram for, we all know what we use Snapchat for, but Twitter and Facebook, and don't get me started on the whole YouTube apocalypse, demonetization scandals. Because good Lord, my
yeah, poor YouTube.
My subscription feed buzzes every time you say that.
Yeah. Well, I think, unfortunately, like, that is sort of the trend of where things are going. And I mean, I personally, I'm more of like a advocate for just freedom. So like, I just because there's dissenting voices out there, like, I think we all have our own perspective on stuff, and I would have to say that the people who are like sort of extremists or whatever, who have like these really crazy viewpoints, they're in the vast minority. And on top of that, it's like, can we really censor everything? No, we probably can't. And it's almost like, I mean, I feel like one of the best solution is to let people judge for themselves. So like, the information can be there. You don't have to, like, Facebook doesn't have to shut something down because and that's tough too, because, there are situations where you're like, wait a second, there's content being put on here that's like really, really, not appropriate. as far as like for an age, we'll just say age appropriate.
Right. And I think that's kind of, at least for, I would say for Facebook's case, I think that's where they've tried to draw the line, although I don't really think they've ever been successful at it, because just to give you a reference of kind of the dichotomy I saw, because have you noticed in your if you use the Facebook mobile app, like one of the maybe past update or two gave you that automatic auto report function, so you could so if any video was in your timeline feed, you could basically choose on top of the share, save, hide functions. You could choose like a report for nudity, report for violence. And what was interesting to me was that there were groups that I'm a part of where people were taking shirtless selfies, and that was, and it was giving me the option to report that as sexual content or nudity. And then there was another, then kind of I followed a chain through a guy who was in the group. He had pictures of various like African massacres. Like I think he had some pictures of like the victims of a Boko Haram massacre. And and the craziest thing was that the video was just autoplay. Like there was no there was no content advisory on the video itself, nor was there any discretion to post it for whatever. Not that I would post it. I mean, not that I would try to have it taken, but the idea is just kind of like the inconsistencies there. Then I know people who are in particularly like LGBT specific groups, groups that discuss nudism as well, and they have that issue where if you post, if you're just naked in your house and it's not sexual, and you're just posting yourself planning in your garden or cooking on the stove, people are getting their profiles locked out. They're getting all that taken out because it's quote sexual content because of nudity, but there's no implied sexuality to it. So there's this weird thing where I think to keep what they call porn off the platform is Facebook's probably main issue, more so than the hate speech kind of issue, at least from my own kind of observation of it all. Seems to be where that's happening.
It's almost like, I mean, I don't have Facebook, but from the way you're describing it, it's almost like the moderator or moderators are judge, jury, and executioner. So it's like, they're making their own calls, but it's not necessarily like, I don't know. Like, well, for example, like a judge is not the only person who decides if a person is convicted of murder. There's a jury that goes into it, and and before even that, there's like a lawyer, opposing lawyers, and they gotta, it goes through this whole process, and that's the point of the process, is that you got to go through it to make sure that this person really is what they are. And obviously, even within that process isn't perfect, but at least with that process, it takes some of the guesswork out of it, and for the most part, things can get done correctly. There definitely are aberrations. So I feel like almost like that whole entire process, while we don't necessarily need to apply that process to every post or whatever that goes on the internet, at the same time, it's like who's judging what is right and what's wrong, and should we even have somebody who's judging what's right and wrong for other people, or just at least just labeling things. Dan, looks like you want to talk, but just maybe the solution is, on that Facebook thing, is just to label, not necessarily take something down, but to label it as like there's those labels like NSFW or
right. So yeah, kind of like
an age rating,
even a hidden content tag.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Kind of like you would on Blogger, Tumblr, etc.
Yeah, like this content is not good for anybody that's under 5 years old, or maybe maybe video content just doesn't autoplay, like,
right, which I think from what I can tell, they've experimented with that either way, so some of it is also what works with the functionality of the current outlay encoding of the website and blah 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 blah. But I think you're kind of bringing up that good point, because it kind of takes me to the the various task force on obscenity and pornography that have existed in most presidential administrations. And kind of the fact that it always goes back to, I think it's Justice Potter was the one who gave that decision that says, basically I'll know it when I see it. And then kind of thinking about internet content, we're judging internet content by the standards of radio and television. There's been no updates to that to fit the digital media era. So, that's what creates a lot of these issues, and you can kind of see some of that happening with, well, I don't know if I want to tie the whole YouTube mess into that, because I think that's a whole, it's an extended can of worms, but you're seeing those conflicts that I think are going to definitely come to a head in the next 5-10 years for sure. Because not just for political content, but for any other educational content, just plain entertainment, you'll kind of see that difference in community standards, because you're always going to have the pearl clutchers and you're always going to have the content pioneers. So I guess we're going to, the pendulum will keep swinging until we find some appreciable median there, and that may actually require legal intervention.
See, I don't necessarily know if it requires legal intervention. I think part of it, first off, Chris, you mentioned autoplay. I think, or one of you two did, and I feel like autoplay should just go away, period. Like, not any rule saying it has to, but it's just really annoying. And I don't know of anybody who actually enjoys autoplay. It just slows everything down. But there's actually been 3 websites I opened up just since we started broadcasting, and I lose my train of thought because the autoplay just kicks in really loud.
Right.
But no, you brought up, on Facebook, for instance, you brought up the moderators. And there's hundreds of millions of pieces of content going out through Facebook alone on a given day, let alone whatever's on Twitter and these other sites, and there's not a person or a team of people who are moderating those things. It's all algorithms. It's all programmed, pieces of code that are going through, probably JavaScript or something like that, or Python scripts that are going through and are, set to identify something that might appear to be nudity or might appear to be something graphic in nature. And those things can just simply be tweaked to, cause like you said, as far as the graphic things like a Boko Haram attack or something like that, those things, I've seen plenty of those in my day, and they're not, I would say that they're inappropriate for children. I would also say that, it's not something that I actively seek out or want to see. Occasionally, if I need to see something for, school purposes or to, just inform myself so that I can speak on a subject, then that's one thing. But I don't think that stuff should ever just be autoplayed or just kind of, right there. And that's a simple fix. And that could even be a simple setting within somebody's profile, as you're setting up your profile, are you okay with this? Are you okay with this? Are you okay with that? And then you go through and you check, yes, I'm fine with this. Yes, I'm fine with that. I don't really want to see that. And then it can simply filter it out. And these are, just very simple fixes that I don't understand why these sites don't put into place. It's like we have to censor the majority or the entirety because a few people are offended or a few people want to have it their way, or even a bunch of people want to have it their way, when it could simply be just a matter of choice and allowing adults to be adults and putting some regulations on kids' accounts and things like that. Because I feel like there's laws about that. There's also, parental guidance should be involved in certain subjects. So I had another thought, but I forgot what it was. So you guys go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's, all that is kind of like what they're doing now. And as far as just trying to moderate things, I feel like, Facebook is in good faith trying to, get this right. I'm not trying to defend them in any way, but I feel like that is something that they're trying to do. And, there's billions of people out there who use this platform, and there's no way you can make everybody happy. But there are some things that, you can only find out, and you can only find out after making a mistake, so to speak. So it's like, okay, autoplay just isn't working, and hopefully they do address something like that. We really do hope that. But at the end of the day, it's like there's just so many moving parts on a platform like that with billions of people accessing it, billions and trillions of times every day. So it's really difficult, like Dan said, to sort of get in to the moderation. So I do see it from that perspective. But it does make me think about just because we talk about there are certain posts that are definitely flagged for moderation for some, a physical person to look at, like that Python script definitely brings things to certain posts and types of posts to a moderator's attention. And with that in mind, you know, every moderator has their own particular perspective on things and how things should be handled. And that brings me back to the judge, jury, executioner thing. But it's so tough. And this is gets at the heart of why I wanted to create this show and went to Dan with it, and just we ran with it. And part of it was to just inform people of things, but also to help people to understand that the news that they get and the articles that they read every day, the posts, the blog posts, everything, it's all an opinion, unless it's like strictly describing events of something that happened. And even when and nowadays it's so interesting, like what's happened with the news media, or maybe it's just more apparent now to me, but it seems like more and more that news outlets who are bringing you the facts of how an event happened are starting to sort of like spin it in a particular direction, you know, and it depends on the source that you get it from too. So we have left-leaning publications, we have right-leaning publications, we have publications that say they're, you know, center, whatever. And I think it's just like such a challenge for people like you and I, just everyday people, to sort of sort through all the bull and, you know, make their own decisions, because you've got news anchors who are basically sharing the news with you and then sharing their opinion on that news afterwards. And
right,
and one particular person that comes to mind just right off the bat is just like people like the Rachel Maddows and stuff. And I'm not like trying to pick on her at all. And I don't know that she's even necessarily like a straight up news anchor anyways. I think that's part of what she is supposed to do. So people who watch her should take that with a grain of salt. But and she's not the only one. You know, there's other people out there. You watch their show and they give you the news chunk. They give you the news facts. It's like the first 20 seconds, and then they go rant on it for the next, you know, minute to 2 minutes about what they think about it. And it's like, well, why don't you just provide the news for me and I can decide for myself what I want to think about it? Because I'm a smart person. Dan's a smart person. Brantley's a smart person. We all are, you know, we're living in the 21st century here, where education is, you know, it's almost like a global thing. Almost anywhere you go, even a lot of the third world countries have education available, albeit at different levels. So it's like, just let us decide for ourselves. You know, I don't want some rich, famous person. I don't want some talking head to tell me what to think. I want to be able to think for myself, and I do. But having to sort through that is just a big problem for me. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
You need to do what you're told, not criminal.
I mean, one of the things I always kind of joke with my mother about is because, you know, she's one of those people that likes the Sunday roundtables. You know, so she'll watch, you know, Scott, what is his name? Dickerson. You know, she used to watch Russert before he died. You know, so you know, so she likes the mainstream media heads, and I always kind of tell her, you know, take it with a grain of salt. Understand that they're functioning. You know, it's kind of a 50-50 kind of thing with them. You know, they obviously have a sort of a spin that their parent company or their direct employer is kind of forcing them to write their news that they deliver to you toward. I mean, that's one of the things why, you know, you may not like Julian Assange, the person, you may not like Edward Snowden, the person, but that's why things like, you know, WikiLeaks are good. They're, you know, and we don't have that kind of, we don't have the same appreciation for that that maybe we had, you know, when, say, Watergate broke out. You know, we don't have that kind of that hunger anymore. We're kind of for that type of free and open access. We've become okay with the talking heads, and then seeing the social media effect. Also, because I mean, you know, like you'll go to Rachel Maddow's Twitter or Jake Tapper's Twitter, and they'll say things like, you know, any retweet does not condone endorsement of opinion, but you know it does. Like, I mean, you know, because the immediacy of social media is that immediate like dopamine kick where you're like, okay, this person agrees with me. They're saying this, they're sharing the same source material I agree with. They're reinforcing that. So social media kind of, because people don't want to look at it, people want to look at it as kind of a tool for the warm and fuzzies. You know, like they say, what is it? Facebook is the life you wish you had. Facebook is the life you wish you had. Google is the confessional of the life you actually live. You know, so there's this whole like, you know, so it's social media reinforces that kind of like warm and fuzzy feeling where you feel that this person is you feel that it's their way of taking you back to the mysticism of the Walter Cronkite's. I think that's their way of approximating it. I mean, because, you know, like I remember, if you've ever seen the documentary, This Film Is Not Yet Rated, where he talks about, you know, the fact that it's like the MPAA is basically the parent tool of all the 5 major news studios, who are then, you know, so they do whatever they can to shut out any independent films that are released in the markets, and they do that, you know, to weaken their ratings, you know, within the association before they're launched. And then if you don't sign with a major studio, then you can't get the distribution rights and the huge opening box office investments and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, so that's kind of where, you know, the corporate media, if we want to call it that, that's where it keeps its talons in you. And then I think social media helps them amplify that, because they say, well, this is someone who's appreciable, and this is someone, you know, this is someone who is coming off their pedestal down to the peasant folk.
Sure.
You know, and I think that kind of creates that cycle.
Yeah, and they're very like, for example, to use the news media as an example, they, you know, I rarely watch it, but you know, when I do, I can see just from a visual standpoint, because I'm an artist, I look from a visual standpoint at how they're presenting certain materials to you. And you could tell, like, whenever, like, it's like hard copy. I don't know if you guys ever watched that show, but back in the day, or heard of it, but they would always it'd be like hard copy, and it's like the story of like a criminal, and it would be a black and white screen, you know, like it's all black and white, like this guy's real bad, you know. And that's how you present things visually to somebody, to know, and they automatically understand, like, this is not good. It's got the thunderous music, boom, 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 like very ominous, and they're presenting it to you that way. And then you've got like, I don't know, My Little Pony, everything's like bright colors and just like, ooh, happy, this is good, this is happiness, this is, you know. So there's visual ways of presenting things to people where to sort of elicit an emotion, a certain emotional response. Disney's masters of that. That's how they present all of their films, and that's because they understand at the base of a human. And you're a psychology major, so like, you know, like we have certain responses to certain colors, to certain, you know, sounds of auditory sounds is very, very well, and it affects people's emotions. But to my point, using the news media as an example, that's how they present the news to us in a lot of cases. They'll show like the bad guy with like the bad music, essentially, you know, albeit not in a filmic sort of theatrical cinematic way, but they are doing that.
Yeah, more of a structural way.
Exactly. So it might be the photograph of a person that is not very liked, that they show it's just not a very complimentary photo of them. They just don't look very great in it, because this person, we don't like them. And then they've got the glowing picture of like the other person or another person that they're like, oh, this person's like the wonderful Nobel Prize winner, and it's like this, you know, nice, like, I don't know, headshot,
profile,
like fantastic lighting,
makes them larger than life itself.
Yeah, and it's just freaking amazing. So, you know, the other guy's got like top light, he's got like big bags under his eyes and stuff. It's like, that's not what that person looks like every day, you know, but that's how it's being presented to you. And you automatically, and I catch myself sometimes too. I'm like looking at it like, oh, you know, like I'm like, wait a minute, this information is being presented in a certain way for me to be able to feel a certain way about it, and sort of guide my emotions, and therefore guide my thought process about this person. The famous saying of like, first impressions are everything, and that we've already made an impression of someone within the first, I don't know, whatever seconds, or I don't want to quote that, but the point being that we're able to, people are very quick to make impressions and of someone, and they're capitalizing on that. The news media and other organizations, they capitalize on that, and they know.
Well, it's not just a person; it can be anything, really. If you like you said, I don't really watch the like mainstream media that much. I don't have TV, so I kind of just get my news from around the internet. And you know, when you go and you watch something from like NBC News, or you watch something from ABC News or something like that, or CNN or Fox or whatever, look at like you said, look at the lighting that they use. Like, for instance, if you see an interview that was done with, for instance, President Trump on, I think it was MSNBC. I saw one, or maybe it was CNN. I can't remember. And the lighting was pretty dark, and it was not flattering lighting at all for him. And then he goes on Hannity's show on Fox, and they had like this professional setup for him and everything. He looked tremendous, and it's all, you know, about, like you said, about presenting in that way.
Lighting the set. Ridley Scott.
You can go beyond the lighting. You can go beyond those kind of things for the individual, and watch these special reports and these exposés that come out about different topics, and you can kind of tell what narrative they're trying to draft from it based on the B-roll that they're playing behind it and the music that they're using as well. It plays to all of our senses as well, not just the visual.
Right.
Yeah, we've all watched a scary movie where there's like the suspenseful movie or suspenseful music in the background, slightly dark, smoky set.
Right.
You know, and
the
you're seeing the
blue
person's
color
face in the
correction.
foreground with like this huge amount of space behind them, like the bad guy's coming out behind you. You know, like you just know, and you have this sense of like unease about it because you're like, oh my gosh, like all of your senses are being triggered to feel that way because of the way that the movie's been shot, the way that the movie sounds, and everything about it. So yes, they're using that type of, you know, it's not all as overt as that, but they use that type of structure to be able to elicit certain emotional responses. Yeah.
Well, and then there's words as well. I mean, I think it was in the first couple episodes that we did where I mentioned an essay from what's his name, 1984 author. Help me out.
Orwell.
George
Orwell. Yes, thank you. It was an essay by Orwell called "Politics in the English Language," where he goes into detail about the ways that politicians, in particular, but we see it played out with media and with, you know, even professors in colleges. We see it played out with all sorts of people, activists, you know, who are promoting a particular cause. They will, you know, it's all about wording. It's about utilizing a proper phrase or proper term in order to convey your message that may have a negative aspect to it, but trying to portray it in the most positive way possible. And so, for instance, he uses the example of a college professor who's advocating for Marxism. And, you know, granted, you know, Orwell, he came out of, I think he was from England, I believe it was, in the 1950s. And so, you know, he had seen communism spread, he'd seen socialism spread and everything like that. And so he was talking about the college professor might come up and start talking about the needed sacrifices that have to be made for the state to establish its control as a socialist or communist society. And it would paint it with more flowery terms. I wish I had it in front of me. I would just read it to you, but I'll try and find it and put it in the show notes for anyone who wants to check it out. But it's, you know, they'll try and portray it using certain words so it doesn't draw up the mental imagery of things like gulags and things like, you know, essentially collateral damage in the revolution kind of thing. But, you know, we may not, it doesn't necessarily have to be talking in terms of things like that. But when you look at what the media is talking about any particular issue, it doesn't, I mean, when you look at the coverage of Donald Trump, for instance, because he's freaking everywhere and it's really annoying. You know, when you look at what Fox is saying about the president, it's always positive. It's always, you know, somewhat uplifting. It's always about how the mainstream media, even though they are the mainstream media, they don't want to acknowledge it. You know, that the mainstream media is opposing the president because of this. And then, you know, they portray the things that he's trying to do as good and righteous and wholesome and perfect. And then you go to MSNBC and he is the Antichrist, apparently. And it's just this conflict. But each one you go to, depending on how you read it, they're omitting certain information in order to paint a picture and a narrative that will help to sway the opinion and the thoughts of the readers and the viewers, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's standard media PR 101. And what makes a news source your favorite is because it speaks that language that resonates with you the most.
Exactly.
So if so if that's what you want to hear, that's what you'll continue exposing yourself to. And I guess the problem for the rest of us is how to break that.
Yeah. We're just speaking the same language here, but that gets back to my frustration of like, just give us the news, just tell us what happened. You know, like the facts are the facts. You know, if it's Donald Trump or if it's whoever, just tell us what he, like, if he's taking a trip to Asia, then tell us he's taking a trip to Asia, but don't make it like ominous and what's he going to do about this stuff. And I think the news just too often just does that sort of stuff. And you're like, I just want to know what happened. And it doesn't have to be, spoon fed to me. But a related question to that I thought about while you guys were while we were discussing was, now we're three guys that I can tell, we definitely appreciate being able to think for ourselves and be able to, I guess, make decisions of like what we should think about things for ourselves. We're not going to be sort of swayed by any of these machinations that we've been speaking of. But do you guys think, I don't know how to word this, but do you guys think that people in general do like that? Do you think that the general public likes to be told what to think, that they like to be told the side of the story that they want to hear, to sort of like pat themselves on the back? Or do you think that's sort of like a fallacy? People want to think for them, really truly want to think for themselves. What do you guys think?
I think that people want to think that they think for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm thinking, it's like, I'm kind of torn, but because I know people who obviously, in truest form of self-expression, they want to push those boundaries. They want to be able to, post naked pictures of themselves on their Facebook, timelines, and not be in threat of, their profiles being deleted, or in the comically known Facebook jail for 30 days where they, cut off your access to post. So I know people who want that, and then I know the people who are perfectly fine reblogging everything Joanne Reed, everything Rachel Maddow, everything Sean Hannity say. So it's kind of that. I don't know. I think people want the illusion of free will, if free will exists in any format. The comfortable illusion, maybe.
We want to look smart. I think that's the bottom line. And Dan, to your point, that was exactly what I was thinking, which was people want to think that they think that they're, or I don't know how you worded it, but it was pretty funny and it seemed very accurate. But I think we all, we're all human and narcissistic to at least some degree, all of us. And we want to look smart. We want to look knowledgeable. We want to seem like we're in the current, in the know. And one of the ways that you can be that way is by following every single, Twitter and Instagram and keeping up with all of them, so that you're like, and everybody's different. Some people are like into movie stars. Some people are into fashion. Some people are into trucks and guns. And some people are into dance and different forms of self-expression. And whatever sort of like is your, that floats your boat, that's going to be like your perspective. But within those spheres, we want to appear like we're knowledgeable and that we have it all together. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make with it, which is just like, it doesn't matter what your lot in life is or what you do, you still want to look good to your peers. And I think that's a natural human thing. But the easiest way to look good to your peers is to be speaking the exact same way that everybody else is, because it's the acceptable thing. I mean, in high school, I remember you just foolishly trying to act like there's sort of like the cool kids. There's the cool kids that, everybody, like certain people want to be like. And so you try to like talk the same way as them, and you try to be the same way as them so you can get that same sort of attention that they get. You join the basketball team or you join the football team or whatever to sort of be like them. But what ends up happening is that's not who I was. I wasn't being true to myself. Therefore, I'm not expressing myself. But if as a culture, we're all doing that same thing that I was doing in high school, we're trying to like just be the cool kids and be acceptable and societal normal, be the cool kids. I don't see the benefit to that, because we all have redeeming qualities. We all have amazing qualities to our personalities. We all have gifts that are enable our self-expression in different ways. Some people are amazing dancers and performers. Some people are amazing at crafting things and building things. And some people are amazing at catching a football with one hand. Some people are amazing at writing stories or being lawyers and stuff. And I think while that a lot of people express themselves that way, I feel like we hold ourselves back in the realm of like in the social media, because it's all about performance, or it's all about appearances. So it's like we have these amazing aspects to our personality that can never shine through on social media. My amazing personality, Brantley, your amazing personality, Dan, cannot shine through on social media. An Instagram picture is not going to show how amazing you are. A Facebook post is not going to show how amazing or how knowledgeable you are about stuff. I mean, because the written word even in itself is an imperfect thing. Like we all know how difficult it is to send a text message, and sometimes that text message, people infer that you're upset because you didn't use a smiley face or an exclamation mark, but you meant no harm. The point I'm trying to make here is that expressing ourselves on a platform that inherently has a flaw to it, where we have to write and take pictures that only show a brief snapshot of what it is that we're doing, is a very flawed way to live our lives and aspire to. These bloggers that are out there who take pictures of themselves in foreign countries on beaches and stuff, and we think that that's their whole life, and that they're just living the good life. But you go and you meet one of them, and they're living in like a 200 square foot apartment with no heat or something.
And you didn't know about the 3 nights of diarrhea they had after eating bad fish in Thailand.
Exactly. So we have this false perception of reality due to social media. We have this false perception of the way things are for people, and then we want to emulate that. So the more we see of it, the more we want to emulate that on our social media, and it becomes sort of like this I don't know, it has this snowballing effect that just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's continuing to grow, and I don't see an end to sight. So I guess to address or answer my own question was, yes, I do think to a certain extent we want to be spoon-fed it to a certain degree, because we want to look and appear as everyone else seems to be looking and appearing. If that makes sense. It's almost like the emperor's new clothes or something. I don't know, where like nobody wants to tell the emperor that he doesn't have his clothes on, but everybody sees the same thing and just isn't saying it. I don't know.
I think it goes back to confirmation bias, that everyone, they want to have confirmation of what they agree with, and it's hard to do your own research because it does take time and effort. And I mean, honestly, it's when you have a divergent opinion that's not held by the majority, or at least it's not held within the circle of friends or influence that you happen to be in, it can be very difficult because people think you're crazy. People think that you're foolish, or that they think that you're the one who's being, brainwashed by the mainstream media that they're also watching, apparently. And, I think what it is, I think it goes back to what you were saying, that people want to be liked and they want to fit in, and that they want to. And I think that the majority of people are smart. And I had a teacher over at the school here for my Windows Server class that he made a statement that I thought was fairly profound. He said that that we all operate with the same amount of RAM, or the same amount of mental capacity, basically, and we all just apply that RAM to specific instances within our own lives. So like, Chris, you're an artist, so you've applied your knowledge, and obviously not the entire bit, but you've applied more of your knowledge to art than I have. I've applied more of it to writing and research and things like that. Brantley applies it to whatever craziness he's into these days. And I think that's kind of the big thing, is that people feel like they want to be able to engage, they want to be able to join in a conversation, they want to be able to hold their own in a conversation. And part of the easiest thing to do that is to follow the same pattern that they've had their entire life of going to school, being instructed by somebody more knowledgeable than them, and then learning that information, being able to regurgitate it to show that you can pass a test. And then they just apply that to their own lives afterwards, where, you go and you watch the evening talk show people, which, most of them I think are fairly pretty good about, identifying themselves as opinion journalists rather than just calling themselves reporters, because they're not reporting the news, they're giving their opinions on things. And so they watch whichever one they relate to the best, which gives them their confirmation bias. And then they go into, work the next day, and they're in the break room or something having a conversation, and they're able to have that conversation with somebody that maybe they would not otherwise have anything else in common with. And it's just saying the same thing they've already heard, because they have at least a modicum of information that they can work with, if that makes sense.
And then the fact that everybody's going to be talking about the latest thing that was shared, the latest thing that was trending, and I think we all exist within that universe to some extent. We all have the water cooler experiences, but I think the water cooler, the physical gather ye around the water cooler to discuss the game, the election, your daughter's 15th baby.
Jeez.
I'm just taking things to their comical limits tonight. But I think that has now been replaced. That's been replaced by the Twitter follow, the retweet, the Facebook share, and even the massive amounts of unofficial response videos that flood YouTube. So I think everybody, because you see this, I see this especially on my YouTube subscription feed, because I'm subscribed to a pretty decent amount of political channels, and you see how some sources won't, you'll see the first responders who will, as soon as something hits the news wire, whether AP covers it, USA Today, New York Times, Washington Post, they'll run it within an hour or two. Then you'll have the kind of the night staff that run it in the evening news. Then you'll have the night staff that runs it in the late night news, and then you might have it'll continue kind of unofficially trending for a week, and then the later news source will put a video out. One of the things that I kind of learned about media is, okay, because I told Dan this once, and I've told other people this as well. Any major trending topic, unless it's like some breaking news event, like unless somebody detonates a truck bomb, shoots up a school, whatever, will typically be reported essentially by midday, and then you'll see that follow into your evening newscasts. Any news like White House news, any news that bad news is always released on a Friday evening. Good news is released on a Friday morning. Bad news is released on a Friday evening. That way you kind of roll into the weekend, or you have something to talk about all through the weekend. So you come back on Monday and talk about whatever. So I think one of the things you have to learn is, and this is something that I think people do have to educate themselves, is media fluency. Understand the way things are reported. Understand especially if you are someone who reads a lot of the mainstream sources or watches them. Definitely understand the way your diet is constructed, and figure out, okay, because you may like Jake Tapper delivering your news, and there's nothing wrong with that. You may like David Muir over there at ABC. We all have our favorites. We all have the people we follow on Twitter. We all have the pages we like on Facebook. That's fine. But understand the way they form the news, the way they deliver the news, and kind of the typical way things move in that kind of sine wave function of, how things will fester. It's been really funny seeing with with like Donna Brazil's her book / media confession. It's been interesting seeing how that has been applied in the last 36, 48 hours, and kind of all the different opinions they're taking, and all the people who are more mainstream news sources are, oh, she didn't mean anything by it, and then the kind of pro Bernie sources are obviously like, oh, this is big news, this is revelatory. So you see the way that is being dissected.
And that was released on a Friday, right?
Yeah, it was. And then and then what was it? Politico published it.
That was Politico, yeah.
Yeah, they published the excerpt from her book, The Treatment. So it's like, so that's what you have to be aware of. And the problem is that so many people, like Dan said, they just kind of want the status quo. And that's kind of where that they want to feel that they know what they're talking about is. But yeah, you kind of have to know. You have to know how it's delivered. So, I would say, hey, if you want to do that, sit in a linguistics course, take a journalism class, understand it from the way the people who are actually trained to do it, because they're being told all those things, whether they're being told in school or whether they're learning it on the job. So one of the things that kind of I got a greater amount of knowledge about that from was the book This Town by Mark Leibovich, because he wrote, he was well, I mean, he still is a reporter, I guess. I would consider him more of a true journalist in the sense that he works for like a city daily newspaper. And he was talking about what happened when Tim Russert died, and he kind of showed you, much like Donna Brazil's the Politico article, kind of shows you the inside machinations of how these operations work. So thank God for the whistleblowers. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and to your point, to both of your points, I mean, I don't know if about you guys, but I remember being shocked when I found out that reality TV was not actually reality TV. And again, like I was telling Brantley before we went on air, I was like, I wasn't always like quote awake or whatever, as some people like Dan I know was kind of always questioning things, but that wasn't really me. And I just remember being shocked when I found that out. I was like, reality TV is not like, they didn't go in there with a camera, just follow people around. Like, they actually have people coaching them on things to say, and they actually have to come up with like sort of like these drama events to make things interesting, because that's what people watch these shows for. That's why people watch anything on TV, is because they want to see some drama unfold. They want to see they want to see something go down, and you got to have something to laugh about. You got to have something to talk about at those water cooler moments, on Monday or throughout the week. So it's just, but it's presented, but reality TV is presented to us as real, as legit, as this happened. This is how things went down. And in a way, that's what we're getting with our news. That's sort of like how we're being fed our news. Like, this is real. This is how it really went down, with a spin. But we're not going to tell you, the spin, that there is a spin. So it's just like, in the same way that I didn't know that reality TV show wasn't real, a lot of people don't know that the news is not always just the news. You're not just getting the news, So, and that was difficult for me to swallow. Not that I was like a huge reality fan, because I wasn't, but it was just like, whoa, like this Keanu Reeves, like, whoa moment, and just
radical, tubular.
That meme of him, like from I forget what the movie was, and his hair's like all crazy, and a lot of people do these memes that'll say something like, whoa, you mean Mario? What if Princess Peach was the really Bowser, or something like that, like something crazy like that. And it's just
right.
Like this picture of Keanu, like
just Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yeah, they take it from Bill and Ted movies. Yeah,
that's probably what it was. But I'm just like, that was me, I'm just like, what is happening here? My whole world is being shaken. And I hope that happens to a lot of people. I hope that happens, if our viewers aren't awake, or if they are, fantastic. But that's sort of like one of my missions, one of my goals in life, and especially with doing this channel, is to get people awake, to have that whoa moment and be like, well, seeing the emperor, that he doesn't have his clothes on, being the one to say he doesn't have clothes, while everybody else is just, oh, how beautiful it is, being that one guy in the crowd, at least get to wake up and say, look, this guy does not have any clothes on. What are you guys looking at? This is not real. To realize that there is a wizard behind the curtain, that type of stuff, and so that's really what I'd love to see, is just to see the American public, the international public, to be woken up and to be stop drinking from like the bottle, the baby bottle of news media and media in general, and start to actively think for ourselves again.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
I don't think it's going to happen, though.
Right. I mean, because the thing is profitability. I mean, that's why reality television is designed the way it is. It gets you all up in its emotions, and then you've binge watched like 6 episodes. That's why MTV does that. It's designed that way. Everything is a surprise multi-episode marathon.
Mm-hmm.
And they devise the plot lines of each episode. That way they serialize it. So, it remains to them as much of a repackageable product as they possibly can. And then they got crafty by chopping up mini episodes, so then, like True Life, and then they would have the individual like little bios and story arcs for the various people they profiled. So, you have True Life, I'm an antidepressant, like I'm on antidepressants, and then you follow like the 3 people who are taking the drugs in their own journey through, depression and all that. So it's a, so they know how to package it to make it sellable. Like that happened to me one summer, and when I came home from college one year, and it's like, you're lazy, it's summer, you're not gonna do anything, and then you find yourself, you're like, I don't even like Jersey Shore, and I just watched like 4 episodes. So you just get taken into it. And it's like, yeah, the drama's predictable, the characters are predictable, you get the little mini recap of everything the episode after. So it's like they're not going to let you escape from what you just saw. And that's how they keep rolling you down.
And another part of that is that you have ammunition in your gun, pardon the pun, but ammunition in your gun for like Monday when you go to work to actually have something to talk about, with your coworkers and stuff, because they watched it too. Like you have this one coworker that, I'm not saying you do, but like say you had like several coworkers that watch Jersey Shores, and you're all keeping up with it. Like you have something to talk about with them now, something to sort of be like with the in crowd, and it feels good for all of us to have that.
I mean, it's that
something in common.
Yeah, it kind of takes it takes 2 kind of things. One, it takes a little bit of antisociality, and it definitely takes a commitment to a higher amount of sort of academic rigor to really understand how to read this, because you think about it and you're like, how many places and people can I interact with where I can have this level of conversation, where you can break things down piece by piece. That's why, however much I don't even know if I want to believe in humanity anymore, but that's why it's like on some level you kind of go, I have to agree with Dan that I don't think people are necessarily going to want to wake themselves up. It may take another kind of deeply disturbing or unsettling event, but hey, we've had enough of those in rapid succession, and the people who want to jump on the causes, and then the energy dies back down to the next one.
Those are the sober people. It's the same it's a reflection of like why does somebody who's an alcoholic behave the way they do? Because they're covering up or they're in a lot of cases they're trying to drink away these feelings that they have, because they know it's going to sort of numb them for a little while. And I feel like social media, reality TV, and the news being presented all in front of people in that sort of way is sort of the drug to prevent them from facing reality that, hey, I have a grandma, hey, who's in the hospital, I have a family, I have a mom and sisters and brothers who I don't pay attention to or give the time of day because I'm too busy on my Instagram feed or arguing with people on Twitter or, you name it. And this is sort of the drug that is keeping that reality nice and smooth, and keeping people maybe from falling into some form of depression in a way. So I feel like it's almost like the public as a broad group is sort of like the addict that needs to sort of like detox from this. We all need to like, get rid of this, or set it down for a little while and unplug it and let it not charge for a while, and just get out to a park somewhere and interact with our families, interact with our friends without any sort of like distractions. Who cares if we don't know what the latest Twitter trending hashtag is? Who cares if we don't know what the last episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians did?
No one needs to know what you just ate.
Exactly. And we're being trained, like you're saying, like, and it's enjoyable stuff. It feels good to watch like Jersey Shores and like these reality shows, because it's like these people it's like you're almost vicariously living this fantasy through them, like this lifestyle that these people have that you probably never, we probably will never have, or, so it's like, in a way, like I could see why, but it's just a drug. It's just a drug to like keep it in our system, and once it runs out, we got to go get some more. We got to go to Netflix and watch the next, binge watch the next season of whatever show, X show.
Were you going to say something, Dan? Okay.
I don't even know. There's been like 10 thoughts.
I know. It's like we go meta, then we go back to Earth, and meta again, back to Earth.
I don't
That's
know.
what
I
it's all
mean,
about, man. Going up and down.
the only thing I really took away from this whole conversation is that apparently Brantley is now addicted to Jersey Shore, and so I vote that we start calling him Snooki from now
Dude,
on.
that was like what, 6 years ago, 5
Wait,
years ago.
Should we start watching Jersey Shore so we can talk about it?
Oh Jesus Christ, no. Don't care. I don't care. But I mean, but it's but it's one of those things. Everyone, and I think what happens is everyone has their guilty pleasures.
Oh yeah.
Everyone has that little off valve, that we all turn to that gives us that kind of enjoyable, entertaining kind of release from our lives. Because I mean, in certain regards, it takes a certain amount of that constant remembering to forget loop that media and entertainment provides, that gives you, I mean, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but you could maybe use it as a way of I guess injecting a little bit of fantasy into your life. Because I mean, let's be real here. I mean, the communist way of life is so dictated by your position is labor, and the capitalist is your life is consumption. So I mean, you're either in the Marxist sense, that's why you can say Marxism is anti-pleasure, because work becomes your life. It just becomes your life in two different forms, either ownership to the means of production or ownership to the means of consumption. So I mean, so when you look at it kind of that way, it's hard not to fall into melancholy, and I think that's where the simple drugs of entertainment, caffeine, sex, and if you want to go into the substances, alcohol, marijuana, illicit drugs, that's where they kind of fall into that use, because they become ways of taking the ultra realism out of life and making it, and I think that's where people can prefer the fantasy over the reality. Sometimes you can get a little too real. I mean, because I mean, think about it. We go watch horror movies, or we watch buddy cops. I mean, to what extent are those antics even allowable in any modern day police department, if ever? So much of what you're seeing is obviously wish fulfillment, and I think people have to understand. And I guess one of the things that I've started coming into knowledge of is how to regulate your desire for wish fulfillment. I don't know if you can, because I mean, it seems a little too limbic. But it's like you need that fantasy, you need that pleasure, and and I think you can live something as too austere a life. So it's kind of you're trapped between two poles, and maybe reality TV falls in there. It's the magic elixir that keeps society running. So hey, maybe Jersey Shore is worth something after all.
I mean, I'm not a kid. When I was a kid, like I remember thinking, like, man, I wish I had more freedom to do stuff. And then now, like off of what you're saying, Brantley, I feel like I have so much freedom. Like, I don't know what adults were like, 20, like for my parents, right? But I feel like, and I love Bad Boys too. Speaking of cops,
right?
Cop shows, but it seems to me like we have so many more freedoms, so much more at our fingertips now than ever before. And it's so hard to quantify that because, I'm 33 years old. So I've only been alive for this small amount of time. But with the internet, with the, you can get your Amazon package you can get your Amazon package the same day delivered.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get that So there's another way of gratifying yourself, is ordering something and getting it in the mail. There's nothing like getting that box on your doorstep and running and opening it up. And then that's why there's all these unboxing shows on YouTube and stuff.
Right. Yeah. The whole videos and all that.
But there's just so much available to us that we can just do. And it's so hard. It's so hard to like say no to everything. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying we should say no to everything, but it's so hard to not have to live the lifestyle that we live now. And I'm like talking with my hands now, but it's so hard to
join the club,
to not live with the lifestyle, because it's like we have so much available to us. And I know the United States, is like probably the top % of that or whatever. And, along with like some countries in Europe, and not everybody in the world has that type of stuff available to them. But I mean, I've been to Kenya. I've been to countries in Africa now where they have, you know, they have really great internet. They have really fantastic service over there for just about everybody, you know, and it's like definitely not what it was like, you know, 30, 40 years ago when it, you know, things were just vastly different. So it's like that type of infrastructure is spreading all over the world, you know, and it's just like I have so many things that I want to do, and so few things that I've actually been able to accomplish because of all of these things, you know, and I think it goes back to, for me, it goes back to like, you know, maybe I should unplug this thing for a while and spend more time, you know, with my family. Like my job is eating up half of my life, you know, and I get a little bit more time to spend with my daughters when I get home from work. And I'm fortunate to have a very short commute, and that's great. And that's a plus, but like, I don't know, like, I feel like I'm like missing out, because like we're here surrounded by other people, you know, and it's like, and we're focused on the other, our focus is always like internal almost, because we're like on our or it's like on that phone, you know, so it is internal because we're like closed into our little corner, like texting, or we're walking and texting and ignoring the wonderful people who are walking by us all the time, or who are sitting next to us. And I mean, I guess maybe I'm like, from my perspective, people are so important. They should be so important, and they're not in my life, you know. So I'm just like, maybe, you know, I should take more time to, like, you know, call my mom, you know, talk to my grandma, and, you know, see them and use that time in a different way. And I know I'm like taking this conversation in a different direction here, but it's just like
we're
talking
going to veer off into a life coaching session.
Yeah, but I want to hear your take on this, especially Brantley, you know, just having done psychology and stuff, and just, well, what do you think about what I just said?
I think one of the things, because I think a lot of it comes with the fact that we are the first generation that was raised around so much technology that the world truly became global. And because there's this interesting, I watched a Big Think video a couple weeks ago, and this guy was talking about kind of the analogy of how we got to kind of the present day economy. And he said, okay, you have two types of workers. You have local workers and you have mobile workers. So, you know, the local workers are, you know, the people who work a lot of the everyday jobs. You know, they're never going to leave. They generally will never leave the city. They grew up, you know, the town or wherever they grew up, and they'll typically be, you know, employed in lower level support positions. And then you have the mobile workers, highly educated, you know, affluence to match their level of education. They're what we would consider the change makers, the movers and shakers. And like he says, what happened was the transfer of labor and the power of that over the last 30 years began to disfavor the local workers and then favor these ultra mobile, ultra educated. You know, that's where a lot of us millennial children kind of fall in. You know, we inherited a lot of the success of our parents, if they were that successful. And, you know, some of us are going to get in there kind of through somewhat more meritocratic ways, but, you know, we're kind of seeing with our own generation how the top performers are rising to the top as they always do, and everyone else is kind of either stagnant or falling closer to the bottom, you know, back into the local labor pool. And I think that is kind of a reflection of our cultural and media and our political beliefs as well. Because, I mean, part of politics is culture and economics and all that. So I think what we're seeing is the ability of those who have the access to go, you know, everywhere, are going everywhere. And we have neglected to really shore up the infrastructure for what's there for the majority of us who will be where we are and will not necessarily have as fluid an experience as the more global people. I mean, I've had, you know, international travel experiences myself. You know, and you see the disparities and you see the excesses and you see where some countries do better than the US. So So I think, I think if we want to create any kind of change, I think it's going to take understanding that dynamic and trying to fix as much as we can for everybody else, because a lot of people are just, and I think that's why people become comfortable. I think that's why you see a lot of people, they choose the job that provides them health insurance, and they live in that city and everything, because at a certain point, security becomes the number one focus, especially when you start raising a family. In a way that, if you're going to be the sort of perpetually 23-year-old, even in your 40s and 50s, who can afford to live in Barcelona one year, San Francisco the next, Sydney the next, Tokyo the next, London the next, some people are going to have that be the experience of their lives now. And I think what we have to realize is that for the bulk of us, we will still be at home, wherever home is. And I think that's kind of my explanation, I think.
Dan, did you have anything to add on to that?
No, not really.
I that was just super interesting to hear, and I think that that makes a lot of sense. And just on a personal level, I mean, I enjoy what I do as far as like, a job and everything, but I'm one of those, I do have a family and stuff. And I've often thought about, gosh, it would be so nice to like move somewhere where I can get off grid, or just kind of just like, I guess, simplify things a little bit, and I don't know, I don't know if that's because I live in Los Angeles and I'm just constantly surrounded by all kinds of like media stuff. Like my company, the company I work for, just had a red carpet event that was like reported all over national news, international news. Yes, the other was it on Thursday night, and that stuff's cool. Like a lot of famous people show up to that stuff, and you're like, oh, this is great. But for me, I don't know, it's affected me differently than I thought it would, and I almost crave like getting away from everything and just kind of simplifying, because it's just like there's just like all this noise, and it's like, I don't know, like I don't know if that's like a weird thing, but I just feel like I want to kind of get away from all so I can focus on some of the things that really matter. But then the frustrating part of it is to affect the change that you want to see in society and in your sort of, and we all have a sphere of influence, but in your sort of sphere of influence, you have to be putting yourself out there. You have to be busy. You have to be working hard. You have to be like one of these people that works like 12, 18-hour days, because, not only are you doing your job, but then you have your other sort of peripheral things where you're trying to affect change, So it's like you have, if you're not motivated by that type of stuff, then you're not going to be able to affect that change. So it's sort of like this, for me, it's sort of like this dichotomy of like, man, I want to simplify, but then at the same time, I want to affect change in society. I want to affect change in my friends. I want to affect change in my sphere of influence, to be able to impact people and improve their quality of life, so that they can, feel better about their lives. And I want to feel better about my life too. And I just feel that, like you're saying, that the mobile worker that's able to go sort of everywhere is able to sort of accomplish all these things. But yet the local worker, those local workers, while you were saying that, I'm thinking like, but maybe those local workers have like better access to their family, and their relationships they're better. And they're, therefore they are more happy with sort of like their status, even if they're not making 3-figure salaries. Money is not what makes people happy. The richest person in the world could attest to that. They have more money than they know what to do with, but that doesn't necessarily make them a happy person.
Right.
Well, and I think we also should consider the impact of modern technology as well. Like, for instance, what'd you call them? Not the mobile worker. What was the other one called again?
Oh, the local.
Yeah, the local worker, who may not ever, leave their home. They still have their sphere of influence, their friends that they grew up with, who stay home with them. They have their coworkers that they see at work every day. They have, their family and people around them that they've always known. But then with things like what we're doing right now, this gives us the ability to share our thoughts and our opinions on things with our new sphere of influence, which is the listeners and the viewers who check out this show, who follow you on Facebook, who follow you on Twitter, who do all these different things. And it provides a new opportunity. Really, I don't know if I told you about it or not, but Chris knows, and if people have been listening for a while, they would know as well that I have a blog that I've been keeping up for about 5 years now. Maybe it's closer to 6 now at this point. And it's got a few hundred followers and stuff like that, but they're always coming back and checking in on looking for updates and looking for new posts and new podcasts and stuff. And and it's really cool because you kind of get to know people, you get to answer their questions, and they trust your opinion, they like your opinion, or at least they're interested in it, whether they like it or agree with it or not. And it gives opportunity for people to kind of expand that sphere of influence. So it's no longer the mobile worker who has the affluence and the means to be able to travel here and there and to get out and get these other experiences. You get a chance to share your life experiences and your interests and the things that you enjoy with the world around you, even if even these people that I've never met. I just got a new follower on the blog that's a family from Nigeria. Never met them, and they're really, really cool though. I actually spent some time talking, kind of messaging with them a little bit, and really, really cool stuff. But I think it's pretty cool because I know I don't have the money to travel to Nigeria or to Brazil or the Czech Republic or any of these other places that I've seen people who have followed posts, who have followed the blog or liked the post and stuff like that, who come to. They're from all over the world in places that I would never get the chance to go to, and I wouldn't get a chance to meet these people face to face. And I think that the reality of the 21st century is that we have these new globalizing technologies that allow even the most impoverished person, if they have access to a keyboard and an internet connection, they can share their thoughts and maybe impact somebody around them. So
I love that, and that's one thing that I really love about the social media and the modern technology. I think that's one of the really big positives. Albeit that it's a contributing factor that adds a lot to the noise of it, but everybody has a voice now. So that is a positive. People like us can start a channel, and people can watch it if they want to, or they don't have to, but we can put ourselves out there and be able to have the ability to access a lot of people. And I think that's fantastic. And it does take a long time to build a following. It does take a long time to do that sort of stuff. I mean, when we see these sort of like mega YouTube channels or podcasts and stuff, I think the general thought is, or at least that goes through my mind or used to, is like, oh, this person got like this overnight. And it's like, that's not how these things work. But so I think, yeah, if there is like sort of a silver lining to the social media type stuff and the media things that we've been talking about this whole 2 hours, is that people like us, regular dudes, have the ability to have a live stream on YouTube, have it, anybody who wants to watch it can watch it. If we get any views, more than like 50 views, I'll be surprised, but that's like, somebody can watch it, and that's cool. That's definitely powerful. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. So we are right now, we're at a little shy of 2 hours. We usually try to go for about an hour and always fail. So I'm glad to know that we're staying consistent with that. But there is one more story I thought you guys might find interesting that you might want to talk about before we wrap up for the night. And let me screen share it with you. I don't know if you guys heard about this or not, but apparently James Comey, the former director of the FBI, drafted his exoneration of Hillary Clinton before the investigation was finished. It came out in a number of reports that were released to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and this statement in this article was released by Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham. So obviously they're fairly partisan. At least I know Lindsey Graham from our state is. Yeah. But I mean, if they're on the committee and they're releasing the statement about it based on evidence that they've seen, I think I saw somewhere that the FBI is not. They said that they are not investigating him, but I don't know if it was a gaffe and it shouldn't have come out, but I heard a recording where the guy who's the current director of the FBI said that the FBI is not investigating, but that the Justice Department is. So he's going to be under investigation because obviously the investigation was still going on at the time, and the fact that I don't know if you guys remember this. I think it was last summer when he came out and he just basically laid out this whole list of, yes, she did this, she did this, she did that, and like all these different things that I believe were actually like criminal acts, and that he said that he was not going to recommend charges be brought, which was shortly before that, Loretta Lynch said that she would follow whatever the recommendation was, and that was also following shortly after the secret runway meeting between
her and Bill.
Her and Bill, yes. So it's hard to remember all these names after all this time, but so this is kind of a revelation that just came out. I don't know if you guys have heard about it or if it's something that you guys want to really talk about briefly.
Yeah, I had heard about it, and it wasn't shocking to me. I mean, especially after all of the stuff you mentioned about the meetings and everything like that, having seen all that. And even at the time, I wasn't really surprised that he wasn't going to press charges. But now hearing this is like, okay, well, it just proves like kind of what I was feeling in my gut. And I think maybe a fair number of people might have been feeling, at least some people. So it's like not surprising, but then the thing that does surprise me a little bit is that the mainstream media is not really carrying that story very much. I mean, the article you showed was CNN, but then they show that stuff and then they kind of like let it go. Yet
they hide it.
So it kind of like they share it and they're like, here it is. We reported it. You know, we're patting ourselves on the back. We reported it, but you know, we're not going to talk about that anymore. But then they carry on with the stories that they do want to carry. For example, you know, and I'm not saying that there's nothing to this, but the Trump Russia connection, I'm just so over it. I was over it, you know, months ago, and I'm still hearing about that. So it's like it's frustrating to hear stuff, continue to hear stuff about that, where there's maybe stuff happening, there's allegations, such and such a person said that they heard this other person say this thing. It's like all third party stuff, but then you have stuff come out where there's actual revelations like these JFK files that we've seen. There's actual revelations like this James Comey thing that we're seeing. There's actual revelations like Donna Brazile. I'm all for hearing the truth, and I'm all for hearing it reported. We've said this during the show, and so I think that's frustrating. That's what's frustrating to me. You know, if something comes out of this Trump Russia thing, fine, but let's just, you know, let's just report stuff and in a manner of things that are important, because that seems pretty important to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, like I said, I agree. It's not too surprising, but I mean, I think in kind of the wake of the whole amount of just mea culpas and just, I think they're just kind of doing it to add to the noise. I mean, on some level, sure, you know, you could see where Comey would, you know, he would have wanted, I mean, if anybody he would have wanted to work with, it likely would have been Clinton. I mean, you know, he worked for Obama, worked for Bush, you know, so it's like, you know, I mean, because you go back to the hearing, you know, go back to his hearing in front of the Intelligence Committee, you know, basically he was just, well, I'm just a civil servant doing my job. It's like everybody knows you were lying. But, you know, I was the dutiful civil servant, you know, I'm a lawyer talking to a room of lawyers.
I'm the victim here.
Right. You know, pity the poor Jim Comey. You know, I mean, I think the way, I mean, he said it when he left the hearing. He said, well, I know with this, I don't have to return to a career in public service. You know, so he's like, well, if he was gonna clear Hillary of various things, then he's like, well, I was gonna clear her various things, you know, because now, you know, because you think about it, you say, well, did Obama tell him to do that? Did Loretta tell him to do that? You know, like who, you know, I mean, you can ask 15,000 questions, but at this point, that's the previous administration. You know, it's just noise at this point.
Yeah,
I agree. Well, that's about.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. Did you have something you want to say?
Well, I was going to add one more thing to that, and it was just that with that guy too, with Jim Comey and all that, it's just it's frustrating to see that it's frustrating to see that what comes out in the news, even back, I think that was happening around February-ish of this year, somewhere around that time. Or maybe it was before that. Good Lord. I think it was before that. Was that 2 years ago now? Because that came out when they were still like in the primaries. So that was like February of last year. That was a long time ago. Good Lord. So anyway, boy, time really flies. But to see something that, has like that could have like a huge impact on the election, and just to add insult to injury to all these Bernie voters, that, sorry to bring this, the election stuff back up, but it feels like, okay, what if they did indict her? What if they did do what if justice really was blind and they did do something? We might have a different president right now. Who knows how that whole election process would have played out had it not been Hillary and Trump. But the point being that things were changed. Like history is different because people didn't do their job correctly, and we don't know what could have happened.
Well, I mean, if you can invent a time machine that affects the whole country and reset us, 2.5 years ago, be my guest.
I would love to do that. But then there you run into the whole, like, what is it? You weren't like, what do they call those? Like the moment in time. If you like see
the paradoxes.
Yeah, paradox. Then I would be scared of that. Like Back to the Future, Marty sees himself, and then like they get into like that alternate reality, and then America's destroyed. What if that happened? What if I went back in time and then America gets like blown up or something? And you never know. I don't know. Too dangerous. Too dangerous.
Well, okay, let's put this. We'll either be singing Russian, Mandarin, or Korean.
Korean.
Oh, that's fair. All right, guys, we are at 2 hours, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up for the night. But this could probably go for like 6 more hours. But I want to say thanks to Brentley for coming on. We really appreciate you being here. It was a lot of fun. For everybody else, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you want more content like this, head over to our website. It's twowiseguys.org. You can also just scroll through the back video catalog on YouTube. Anybody who prefers the audio format, you can also subscribe to the podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all the big ones out there. You can also like us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/twowiseguys. Follow us on Twitter at twowiseguyshow. Brentley, do you have a Twitter or anything like that they can follow you at?
Not one that I want to pimp out.
Okay. Well, then in that case, we'll come back to it later. But yeah, anyone who wants to be a financial supporter, we'd really appreciate it. You can head over to patreon.com/twowiseguys, and you can sign up for as little as $1 per month. But there's monthly brackets there that have some benefits as well. So, but yeah, this has been a fun episode. It's been a lot of fun. A lot of stuff to talk about, a lot more to talk about next time. So maybe Brentley can come back another time if we haven't driven him away with our craziness. But that's going to be all for this week. The next episode will be 2 Saturdays from now. That's going to be Saturday, November 18th, if I got my calendar correctly. And it'll be 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, as usual. Chris, anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, just really enjoyed having Brantley with us as our special guest. I really think the conversation was really enriched by you. So hats off to you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for putting up with us for 2 hours.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, everybody. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. And until next time, stay woke, I guess.